Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted and privileged to welcome a very, very senior professional turned entrepreneur from the US, Maggie Chan Jones. Maggie, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Ashutosh. It's great to be here with you.
Thank you. Maggie is the founder of Tenshey Inc, which is focused on elevating more women and minority leaders into leadership roles and the boardroom. She's been a C-level executive, a board member, and an advisor. She was earlier the chief marketing officer of SAP. She's an author, and all of you know I'm partial to authors. She's an author of a book titled Decoding Sponsorship. And of course, given her background, she's been awarded, recognized, and felicitated globally. Maggie, what an amazing journey you've had so far. So let's start talking about Tenshey. Or Tenshey, I hope I've got the pronunciation right. Tell me about the venture.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm so delighted to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.
So Tenshey is a company that I started 4.5 years ago. Mm-hmm. And to your point, after spending 20 plus years in corporate America, and, throughout my journey into the C-suite, I realized that I didn't really see a lot of people who looked like me. Mm-hmm. And, throughout my journey, I also had a lot of people asking me, how do you get to the C-suite? Mm-hmm. What were some of the lessons learned? So that was really the motivation behind founding Tenshey. Mm-hmm. Tenshey's mission is all about advancing diversity in the workplace. Mm-hmm. Thinking about, 90+% of our clients that we work with are minority leaders, whether they're women, LGBTQ, ethnic minority. We really want to work with organizations to really help create that, diverse, inclusive, and an equitable environment so everyone feel like they belong. So we focus on executive coaching. We do a lot of sponsorship programs, which is also why I wrote my book, Decoding Sponsorship, is really sharing my learnings about sponsorship in the ways that future leaders and next generation leaders can leverage those type of learnings for their own career growth. And also for executives or former executives to give back, right? To pay it forward on, how do you be a great sponsor to others, to the next generation leaders?
Quite amazing. But before I go further, what does Tenshey mean, or is there a meaning behind the name?
Yeah, thanks so much for asking. There is. So Tenshey, the pronunciation of that is the same as angel in Japanese and Chinese. And, when I started the company, I was really thinking about, executive coaching was the inspiration of how I started the company. I really see my coach and all the coaches as, as our guiding angels. So, so that is really why I have this name.
Amazing. So now moving on, Maggie, what are some of the equity or inequity challenges being faced by a lot of the minority leaders and women leaders in the world or in the corporate world?
Yeah, so let's talk about, I think there are a few, big topics, right? One is, just the societal environment. We as individuals, we all have unconscious bias. So, when we see people who look like us, or when we interact with people who remind us of ourselves, or our younger selves, typically we see that, we would be like, wow, that person was just like me when I was younger. So I want to help this person to grow. The challenge of that is, you kind of, if you're not being mindful about, who you're sponsoring or who you're, cultivating, then you may end up, cultivating a group of the same group of people. So, which is why we see that, the disparity of the numbers when you look at the C-suite. only, in corporate America, only 20% are women and only 4% are women of color. Men of color is the same thing, is significantly lower than white males. So, being mindful about seeing these numbers and knowing that, how did, let's take women as an example. How did we go from, when everyone start at the entry level is 50% men, 50% women, to at the top, it's only 20%. So being mindful of that is going to make a difference on, how you select a team. Because I always see, executives, leaders, talking about, I just want the best person for this job. And I always say to them, okay, you're trying to build the best team. So how do you build a team that is diverse and inclusive so that you can get the performance that, that you want, the high performance that you need? And then the other thing too is, outside of the societal, you think about policies, right? Whether you're thinking about companies like private sector or public sector, a lot of the policies are not necessarily equal. What I mean by that is, women still tend to do a lot more work in their household. So, obviously with childcare as well, how do you balance that in the, in the public sector policies, private sector policies, so that, women can also be able to, build their career while also maintaining the household responsibilities or sharing that with their partners as well.
Correct.
And then the third one is internal.
Correct.
What I mean by internal is within yourselves. When you're seeing those stats that I mentioned, when you, as a woman, or especially people of color or women of color, thinking about intersectionality, if you go on a lot of, going for promotions, like new roles or new opportunities outside of your companies, and you keep getting rejected, like more and more, you're going to start thinking, is that me? Right? But if you don't know there's so much headwind against you to begin with, then you may get discouraged and your confidence for yourself may go down. So, so those are the different pivots, I would say, that are important to think about as we think about, why we are where we are.
You're so right. I was speaking to someone a few days ago, and they were actually concerned, and they're working on how do you bring women back into the workforce at the same level after the man and the woman decide to start a family. So the two people start a family, and the woman leader is the one who takes a bit of a what's the right word? A step back. And this person I was talking to, they said, "Why must this happen?" I mean, but you're so right, Maggie. Moving on, you also say that you follow a process to identify leaders and integrate them. Help me understand this process that you follow.
Yeah. So in my book, Decoding Sponsorship, I talk a lot about, how do you identify the right people to sponsor, right? First and foremost, I do think that being aware of how do you create a more equitable world means that you most likely want to sponsor people who don't look like you, right? And that's, one of the areas to look at. And then the second piece, I think about it as 3 C's. I think about people that, that we want to sponsors are, at least for myself, I think about people I want to sponsors are people who are curious, meaning that, they're always wanting to learn more, learning different things, because in our world, especially, coming from the tech world, innovations is coming from people who are curious, who want to solve a problem. So you want to have that curiosity. You want to continue to learn new things. Second, the second C is really about capacity. Do you have the capacity at this moment in time to really invest in your career? To your point, there may be time in your life that you may want to focus on other things. In my case, which I wrote in my book, that when I was going through my executive MBA program while working full time, that wasn't the time that I could dedicate 100% on my career. And that was okay. So, you got to give yourself the permission to not always focus on one thing, but, things come in and out based on where your life stage is at, based on what's happening in your environment as well. And then the third C that I have is competencies. Okay. I think about the skill set, right? Depending on what you're looking at in that particular role or, that leadership, what kind of competencies and skill set does this person have? And that can really, set them apart to grow, faster than other people. So that's kind of how I think about the 3 C's on sponsoring people and how I think about, helping these leaders to realize their career dreams.
What a great response. Maggie, you also talk about DEI, which most people understand as diversity, equity, inclusion, but you've redefined DEI to mean discover, engage, and ingrain.
Yeah.
Help me understand these terms and maybe share some examples of how you go ahead and implement this DEI strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the way I think about DEI in the context of, let's say our sponsorship programs, really focusing on how do we elevate diverse talents in an organization. In the face of discover is, I always believe in what gets measured gets done. In the tech world, we are so deep focused on, data. Correct. Right. So if you don't have data, you don't know where your baseline is at. So really understanding what is your baseline, what is the challenge that you have and where exactly that challenge lies. And I can tell you with working with so many global enterprise companies on our DEI, and sponsorship programs, we see that a lot of companies, of course, everyone would say they want to get more executive women in their executive team. At the same time, we are starting to see more and more companies are saying that that's not our biggest issue. Our biggest issue is, the middle layer of our leadership pipeline of the succession planning. Right. Like we are seeing a drop off at the mid-career level. And we also call it the frozen middle. What I mean by that is, it's really hard to break through when you're going from a senior manager position, going into a director level position. Especially women, to your point, those are typically we see women in that level are also at the same time in their life to think about families. So, so how do we, in our sponsorship programs, we focus on people who want to continue to grow their career with their organization, and how do we give them the visibility, the efficacy from the sponsors and, and the network that the sponsors can help them create. So being able to discover, where your challenges are, and then, engage that population, right? Not only the people you want to support and grow, but also your senior leaders. I mean, they are in such a great position to help the next generation leaders. And one of the things that I hear, a lot from our sponsored members, like, thinking about them as the proteges, right? They would be like, well, I don't want to waste my sponsors' time. I feel like they're doing me a favor by supporting me in my career growth. And I'm like, that is furthest from the truth, because as a sponsor, meaning as a leader in the organization, they all have the responsibility to grow the next generation leaders, because when the next generation leaders can, take on more responsibilities, that is also a win for the company as well. And when employees feel like they're being valued, they are being, groomed, as you will, then they are more likely to stay with their organization. So retention is a huge factor nowadays, right? And so that is why we believe that sponsorship program, especially for diverse talents, is so critical. And, and it is also a game changer when it comes to, like the typical programs that we see a lot are more on the mentorship, which is absolutely critical. But at the same time, if you really want to elevate your talents, especially diverse talents, you have to think about how do you gain sponsorship to help accelerate their career growth. And then the last thing, talking about the Ingrain, is really about building the muscles. Like I always say, our sponsorship programs are not about just that moment in time you get a sponsors help you to create a bolder vision for your career and helping you to grow your career. But it's really about how do we help you to build muscles on how do you identify the sponsors, how do you cultivate those relationships, and the same thing for the executives. How do you become a better sponsors for the next generation leaders?
Fascinating. My next question to you, Maggie, is on culture. You worked with large multinationals and at very, very senior levels. I'd love to get your perspective on how does culture impact diversity and equity and inclusion?
Yeah, I think it goes both ways. And I'm going to start with how DEI impact culture first.
Okay.
When you have a diverse workforce, and we have seen studies after studies, that said that when an executive team or when a leadership team are more diverse, they actually perform better in the marketplace as compared to their competitors who are not, right? So when you have a more diverse workforce that feel like, wow, this is the place that I feel like I belong. This is the place I can be at my best. And this is the place that I feel like I can innovate with my colleagues. That's when the company will do better and performing better in the marketplace. And they also reflect the world that we see, the customer base that they serve, because, obviously, when you look at global companies, they serve so many different countries and people of different backgrounds. So when you have a workforce that look more reflecting more as your customer base, you will have a better understanding of your customer base, and therefore you perform better. And that is validated by different studies. And, so that really influences your company culture as well, especially when it comes to belonging. And, vice versa, right? If you have a culture that really invite everyone to speak up, everyone to have equal voice, and that is also going to help the organization to create a workplace that people want to be part of, that people want to continue to innovate and also be more engaged in their work as well.
Right. Very interesting. So Maggie, I have time for two more questions that I'm trying to decide what to ask you. But let me now move to your book.
Sure.
You did speak very briefly about decoding sponsorship. Before you tell me about your book, is this available on Amazon and other platforms?
Yes, it is available on Amazon. I believe in many countries that Amazon is in. Is also available as an iBook and also on the Barnes and Nobles online in the US. That one.
Okay. Got it. So tell me a little bit about this book and your motivation. What was your hypothesis and what was your motivation to write it?
Yeah, this actually connect very closely to my company, Tenshey. As I embarked on this journey on building my company, I see a lot of next generation leaders, where they were struggling and how transformative coaching and sponsorship have helped them in their career growth. And I was thinking, in our work with sponsorship, that only works in most cases is when the organizations decided to, to use this as an opportunity to grow their diverse talents. So, obviously we are so grateful for those companies willing to invest in their talents, but at the same time, not every company does that. Correct. So, my motivation behind the book was, how about I share, a lot of what we share in our sponsorship programs, in what are some of the ways to gain to earn your sponsors, right. And, what are the tips and tricks? And, as I grew my own career, through my own stories, and what kind of insight I can share with people so that, you don't have to make the same mistakes that I had. Ashutosh, like one interesting fact is when I was writing my book, I initially thought, this book would most likely be a book for people who are already in mid-career or later stage in their career as an executive. Right. But what I realized once the book is published, and I'm sure you feel the same way, thinking about your target audiences for your book, right? What was interesting was a lot of the feedback that I got was a lot of people said, oh, I wish I had this book when I was in my 20s. So what I see is a lot of leaders actually buying my book, Decoding Sponsorship, for their teams so that they can learn some of the advice, some of the learning, some of the stories, as they continue to grow their career.
Amazing. Well, I'm going to look out for your book on Amazon, and I'm going to ask all our viewers and listeners to go and check it out.
Thank you.
So, Maggie, my last question to you, and this is for the many, many viewers and listeners who will listen to our conversation. What would you say are 3 key lessons that you would like our viewers and listeners to take away from our conversation?
Yeah, so I would say first and foremost is believing in yourself.
Correct.
Because, you have to be the one who really believes to make things happen. Yeah. So especially, we're in a challenging time between the, pandemic and the war and everything going on in the world. Yeah. I think, you have to really focus on what is it that you want in your life and how do you get there. Correct. Right. So believing in yourself is very important. And the second thing is, adding to that point is to be kind, to have compassion for others and to have compassion for yourself. And then the third one is do take risks in your career. Because I always believe that, to really realize your own potential, you have to get out of your comfort zone. So being able to do that and, sure, taking risks means there's also a possibility that it may not go the way that you wanted it to go. Correct. But I guarantee you the learning from that experience is going to help you as you continue your journey as well. And if I can have a final one is find a way to have fun, right? Because, life is short. Yeah. So, have fun while doing what you're trying to accomplish.
Wonderful. On that note of believe in yourself, be kind, take risks, and finally have fun in your journey. Maggie, thank you so much for speaking to me. Thank you for talking to me about Tenshey and the amazing work you're doing to bring more women and minority leaders into leadership roles and the boardroom. Thank you for talking to me about your DEI strategy of discover, engage, and ingrain. And thank you for talking to me about your book, Decoding Sponsorship. Thank you again and good luck.
Well, Ashutosh, thank you so much for having me. I love that you're doing this podcast to really get the voice out, get the learnings out there for so many around the world. Thank you for doing what you do.
Thank you very much. Thank you for listening to the brand called You Videocast and Podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.